1865. Okay, I'm just clipping because it actually mentions the
This is the one we talked about yesterday.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
exactly.
And this letter is very specific. Some 8 or 10 years ago, a man appeared in the south of Persia in the neighborhood of Shiraz and put forth pretensions that that the only way of access to God for mankind was by him. But accordingly, he assumed the name Bab, the Arabic term for door, and he found some persons who soon acknowledged his pretensions and who became his adherents. And he goes on and on and on. This is very specific.
And what date?
1865 in South Carolina.
It was, but
And I
the newspaper was burned down in the first place. He resurrected the newspaper
Right.
and produced
This newspaper, the printing publishing house, was burned down during Sherman's March. I checked in the history of this newspaper. 3 months after it reopened, this is on the front page.
Huh.
Nobody knows why this here. I've told Louis Venters, who's the expert on Baha'i faith in South
Yeah.
Carolina, not a clue. He's as shocked as I am. Okay? But this letter, if you circulate it among Baha'i scholars, and I did, because I didn't know where is this letter coming from? There's no author on this. It's just it's an article. What is this? And several people pointed out that this has a strong similarity to a letter that was published in German. And to make it a long story short, the man who wrote this is Reverend Austin Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T, and his letter has been known for over a century in German because his supervisor, Reverend Perkins, I can't remember his first name, translated it and sent it to be published in a newspaper in Germany. I don't know why, but these are the facts, okay? But there's an extra paragraph in the English that was not in the German translation. I send you specimens of the papers Bob wrote during his confinement at Sharid. But this is what I'm just raising it. No, this is Sharid. Sharid. It is said that several horseloads of such papers were found after his removal from that place. The British consul, resident at Tabriz, having obtained a number of them, gave to me those I now forward.
It's somewhere in the...
They have been shown to Abdullah here, who is a good Arabic scholar, but he is unable to decipher them or to extract any meaning from them.
It's one of those that just says Baha, like
Or a
1,000
star,
times.
and it could be all kinds of things. There's lots of really, but there's horse loads of stuff in this prison, and some of it comes out, and the council, British council, gives some to him because he's a kind of a Arabic scholar or something, beginning of a collector, and he sends it to, and this is not clear in the article, it's the American Oriental Society.
Plus, his physician was a Christian.
They invited Abdu'l-Baha to give a speech in the States, right?
Well, there's lots to go into. I'm just I'm just clipping away because it mentioned something Bob, so I had a hit in a search, and this came up, and this came up.
Amazing.
Nobody knew this. There is a mention of the German in Mujan Moment's Contemporary Western Accounts. It talks about this letter. He thought the letter was so important, he reverse translated the German back into English to include in his book. And he said the English was lost. I'm not sure the exact sentence, but along that line.
Yeah.
The English was never found, it was never published. I found the original published because I had the exact language. I could do a search based on this. 1865, I found one in 1851 in Vermont. A newspaper in Vermont published
51.
it with credit. Said where the meeting was, what was the publication name, and even the page numbers. I think it was actually fully cited. So then I was able to nose around, and Dartmouth University had the whole set of proceedings of those publications that the American Oriental Society did, and they were kind enough to send me a copy of it for free.
It was all digitized.
Yes.
Oh my God.
They didn't have it online, but they had it digitized, and they sent me a copy, a PDF copy, which I immediately forwarded to the house.
So the
with all this
Bob's
content.
writings that are named here,
Made it to America in between February and June, because the meeting was in June, 1851. And there's more to tell. The point here is, I had no idea. Nobody knew this. And I was just scratching away at newspapers.com to find things. And this blew up in my face.
You know, those are one of the biggest impediments for me to hear about the Bab being the first prophet, but knowing very little about him, you know.
Right.
I mean, knowing a whole bunch about Baha'i, of course, but you know, very little about the Bab.
Right.
Well, this like
Yeah.
you know,
And this is a Christian Protestant minister writing all of these. So he's writing from a perspective. I will give you a taste at something I'm not going to show you. We found original letters from this man, from the man who wrote this article, the original draft of this letter. And he collected it himself. He has an index of all of his letters. It's like he drafted a letter before he wrote a final copy and then mailed it. So in that letter, he crosses out, what did he say in this letter? Pretensions. So you can see him arguing what word to use. And he goes back and forth in the letter between, essentially, in my wording, is he crazy or is he sincere and just loony? And you see him going back and forth on what's the right word to use. And I'm not going to settle that argument here. This is he did not recognize the Bab as a manifestation or a prophet or a Christian leader or anything. He saw him as a spectacle of Persian culture, making huge religious pretensions with great implications, but did not buy into this. So he couldn't decide, is this guy crazy or is this guy sincere but loony? And he couldn't decide ultimately. He's slightly favored. He's not literally insane. He's just loony.
well, Christ was insane, so he got rid of him.
Right. So there's that. But to this guy, he never made that connection. He never recognized that Jesus was kind of crazy in his day. So anyway, that's the first thing I just wanted to show you. Now I'm going to go somewhere else. Go to Baha'iTeachings.org and do a search for Harlem. You can do this. There's multiple ways you could do this search. I'm hoping this one will be the most effective. There we go. All right. Yes. So here you have several articles that I worked with Christopher Buck, and you'll see my name on some of these. And what we have here, from a Baha'i perspective, is a person you probably have never heard of, Mary Hanford Ford. Okay, she was another discovery. Holy cow, this name keeps coming up as I'm collecting Baha'i references. I have over 800 newspaper clippings about Mary Hanford Ford. Her whole life, huge life, lots of things going on. But for about 10 years, she was deeply involved with a church in Harlem. And this became a series of articles and includes, you can read, why a Harlem Baptist preacher became a Baha'i. Why would a Harlem preacher visit Africa to teach the Baha'i faith? So she was, much like Zabina, behind the scenes on a lot, but mentioned in articles. But other people would be coming in to do a presentation or to, like I am right now, I'm leading the discussion, okay? I'm presenting something. But Mary Hanford Ford brought me in. Mary Hanford Ford organized to make sure this event would actually happen. Mary Hanford Ford did a lot of things. And her presence and the people that she brought in became part of a Christian church experiment. Just again, briefly, a black minister on his own thinking, we don't know all of his thinking, but some of it was, he recognized that the black church's mission of transformation was running into a roadblock reaching the white community. Okay? So this is someone who's convinced that Christianity can change the problem of racism, but we're preaching it to people who are here, preaching it to the choir, if you will take the analogy, okay? So he intentionally moves. He breaks away from the AME. He moves out of the black part of Harlem, because at this point, Harlem in general is a minority black section. It's going to grow during his lifetime because of the Great Migration. But at that point, he could move out of the black section of Harlem and still be in Harlem. So he sets up church, and he's going a few years. And the local Baha'is begin hearing that there's a church trying to bring white people and black people together in this Christian church.
What era are we talking about?
This is 1915 is when he started. Around 1915 is when he started. The Baha'is became involved apparently around 1917, 18.
Okay, I just want to establish that.
This is very early stuff.
Yes.
And it was, if you search the entire archives of the New York Age, one of the greatest African American newspapers, and look for Baha'i things, it's a trivial but ongoing amount. And there is this giant spike covering what happened at that church. And it covered almost at least weekly, sometimes multiple times a week, referring to events that were happening at the church, very similar to the idea of how the museum operates, except that they're a Christian church, so they're having Christian meetings, and the Baha'is are welcome to come in, and they get to hold a meeting in this Christian church. This Christian church was their apartment. They had they intentionally bought a large apartment, set up, redid a renovation, so they had a large meeting room, and held church in their living room for on the order of 10 years. Well, actually, closer to 30, 40 years.
We can relate to the living room idea, can't we, in here?
Yeah. And for about more than 5 years, close to 10 years, the Baha'is were deeply involved. And then what's happened, I mean, it got so incredibly engaged that the leading minister who ran the establishment became a Baha'i officially. I mean, wrote a letter to Abdul Baha, got a confirming letter yet, led some of the Baha'i meetings, read Baha'i prayers and writings at some of these meetings, literally.
What was his name? Do you remember his name?
His last name was Bolton. Reverend,
Was it Bolden?
I think it's Bolton.
Yeah,
with a T.
Reverend Bolton, that's good enough.
And read the articles. Just do it, like I said, go to Baha'i Teaching Search, do a search for Harlem. You'll see some other articles. There's a lot of history in Harlem. There should be a whole book on the Baha'i faith in Harlem. But we had like 10 articles come out of this discovery that I wasn't even looking for. I had no idea. Nobody knew about this stuff. There's one other scholar who was literally at the same time working on producing an article that is included in the second volume of African American Studies in the Baha'i Faith. The first one was like Social Justice, and the second one had another subtitle I can't remember. Unfortunately, it's a very expensive book. But he's the only other scholar who knew about Reverend Bolton. And no, it's, oh God, I can't remember. It's Bolton or Bolden now.
Doesn't matter, don't worry.
He knew about it, but he had like this much information about it. He knew the church and he knew the activities, but it's a small section of a much larger work. And we turned it into, I don't know, 8 or 10 articles worth of stuff. I wasn't looking for it. I had no idea this existed. I was doing a survey of mentions of the Baha'is in general, an African American collection of newspapers. And New York Age was this huge spike, so I was like, what's going on in New York Age? And I tripped across this. I knew Mary Hanford Ford previous to this, and I still didn't know that she was involved with this stuff. Because at that point, I didn't have access to the New York Age.
Now, of course, she died in Florida, and I was very, very aware of it. And she was a famous theater critic. That's what she was famous for.
Yes.
And so in the world of theater, she was a big deal.
Yes.
And her reputation and her opinions meant a lot.
I've got a whole. If you go to
And the book
search
the book that she has written
wrote,
is called The Oriental Rose, and we have a copy right here, of course, in the museum.
and there's a whole Wikipedia article. Now Wikipedia likes summaries of things, but you can't do original research, so you can't make up a connection of an ideas and summarize something that someone else didn't state. There is no biography of Mary Hanford Ford, so nobody did that. So the only thing I could do in Wikipedia is bullet by bullet, this is what happened in her life, reference by reference by reference. And I said there's 800. We have a person coming through.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so it talks, this is Gail Morrison, and she's saying, the intense pace of his, meaning Mr. Gregory's journey, was maintained in the state of Washington, where he gave 13 meetings in 9 days in Spokane and 24 meetings in 8 days in Seattle. On a single Sunday in Seattle, he addressed 5 gatherings, 1 to the Baha'is, 2 at churches, one at the Black YWCA, and a banquet attended by nearly 50 people. Among the, and this is what he says, unusually intelligent and progressive black community of Seattle, he found several individuals who he felt might become teachers of the faith. Words cannot express what Mr. Gregory's visit in Seattle has meant, not only to the Baha'is, but to the whole community. The local assembly wrote in gratitude, the spirit of unity and harmony manifested was unusual. Our dear brother is such a wonderfully illumined soul. We just kept him going at top-notch speed, sending out his bright rays to at least 2 audiences a day, and sometimes as many as 4. He was always so willing and gracious about everything that we just felt we wanted him to stay in Seattle all the time.
What year was this?
This was
22.
This was 19. The transition between fall 1921 and spring of 1922, when the master passed. This is like right after that, right in that winter time.
So a
this-
century ago.
Yeah. So just a century that goes. So essentially, what I'll say at this particular point, because I haven't set it up yet, is that what Stephen's work was when we got together as historians, was that he had, I said, gotten all of these articles, because I was trying to get the history of the Baha'i faith in Lansing, Michigan, and it turns out Stephen had already got all of these articles together involving Lansing. But there were specific articles that were in the Baha'i National Archives, and then there were articles that were at the World Archives involving, that said, Lansing. And one of those articles was Ali Cooley Khan came to Lansing in 1937. And when he was in Lansing, he was there for 3 weeks, and he gave firesides, particularly about the Baha'i faith. In Lansing, Mary Hanford Ford passes away in Florida. Ali Cooley Khan finds out about this
When he's in Lansing.
when he's in Lansing and writes from Lansing to The Guardian in Farsi, indicating how much he wanted The Guardian, it says, to make a special dispensation for Mary Hanford Ford, because it was Mary Hanford Ford who in 1904 gave Florence Breed, the daughter of American Revolution, and it says this descendant of Breed's Hill, which is not about a Bunker Hill. Florence Breed got her first book, Baha'u'llah's Hidden Words, from Mary Hanford Ford. She marries Ali Cooley Khan, and they have 3 children. And the idea about this being so important to Ali Cooley Khan that he would write in Farsi, and that was translated at that point. It says there at the World Center, because I asked for the translation. But what I was trying to find out was a collection of things involving Louis Gregory. And one of the things that's mentioned in here in 1924 was the fact that Louis Gregory had been in Michigan, but they didn't know where. And they said a successful teaching effort in a black summer colony in northern Michigan. Well, it turns out that the black summer colony was Idlewild. And Idlewild is known throughout, as said, the United States early history as being a place where blacks from all over North America could come and feel, it says, as welcome as any other place. It did not exist anywhere else. It was started in the early 19 teens by, of all people, W.B. Du Bois, and the earliest, there was one investor who was a prominent member of the Ku Klux Klan. So W.B. Du Bois invites Louis Gregory to Idlewild, and Louis Gregory is there for a month. And the letter he writes to National indicates the difficulty of, it says, him being there, but also the promise and the receptivity of the individuals there. And so one of the pieces is a letter that he wrote that says back to National, but the newspaper article that was contained involving his teaching events is what Stephen Collins found in the, it said, Lake Star Ledger of Baldwin, Michigan, which was through the archives of Central Michigan University. And it just became available, like in the last year and a half or so. And he said, I think this is what you want. And I said, well, I've always posited about Louis Gregory being in northern Michigan. And it turns out he was there in 1924 for a month at Idaho.
I have a question.
Yeah, okay.
Louis Gregory was writing reports of his teaching work.
Right.
He was sending reports to the Guardian,
Mm-hmm.
which the
And
International Archives had, but not necessarily to the National Assembly as much as to the National Teaching Committee.
Right.
Well, remember that also his primary chain of communication was killed in an auto accident.
That's right. That's right.
So Louis Gregory is traveling around the country sending letters. Where is he sending letters? So the connection until 1925, something like that. Joseph
Hannon.
Was his contact point, and then Joseph would forward it on to whoever, who was next in the chain. But Louis Gregory and Joseph Hannon were sending the actual letters back and forth. Joseph Hannon would respond to every single letter Louis Gregory sent, and Louis would say, I'm going to be at this place next, send the next letter there. So there'd be this constant back and forth of letters as Louis Gregory's traveling around the United States, which he did many times. And in, I think in 1925, Joseph was in a car accident and died very quickly shortly thereafter. The last letter known that we are sure he was carrying was bloodied by the accident, by Joseph's blood, and it was to Louis Gregory's compatriot traveler, Roy Williams. And Roy Williams got the letter, and something like, 60 years later, 60, 80 years later, Roy Williams is being interviewed about sort of the research to move the world or something.
Yeah.
And there's a recording of this that's available. I think there's an audio recording, but I'll also was like a description of what happened. He pulls out this letter and he cries about the murder. We don't know it was a murder. I'm on the edge of calling it a murder, okay? But of the death of Joseph Hannon. Roy Williams cried, holding the bloodied letter that Joseph Williams was conveying back to Roy Williams from wherever.
Yeah, that Louis Gregory's conveying. So it says that was the difficulty, and it says involved in that was that Roy Williams, it says, was that unsung hero, and the archives have had displays of Louis Gregory's work with Roy Williams. And one of the things that we had noted, like I had said beforehand, was that Louis Gregory was kind of all over in all of these places, but very few of them were documented. One of the historical points of Louis Gregory's visit to Michigan was the fact that in Muskegon in 1928, Louis Gregory and Sadie Oglesby are speaking in front of the Muskegon Local Spiritual Assembly.
This is a place in Michigan.
And this is a place in Michigan. These are two people of color speaking to a majority of people that are white about the faith, specifically the Local Spiritual Assembly. It says Sadie Oglesby, and to my knowledge, there are very few places where the two of them spoke together. Whereas Louis Gregory spoke with Corinne True, and Louis Gregory spoke with other folks, it says in different places in different cities. And so Louis Gregory goes from Muskegon to Lansing. And Lansing has Louis Gregory for 3 days. But Lansing doesn't have any records of Louis Gregory. Lansing, that's the Baha'i community, and it says doesn't have any records of Louis Gregory, but he's there in Lansing for 3 days, and then he leaves, and then the letter that was written by Helen Whitney, who became Helen Eggleston of New Helen fame, writes the specific letter back to National saying we need better publicity, and the third paragraph she starts as in North America. So, David Earlington is dressed white. He was a code man, as he's got trained involved. This is in Golden, Colorado. And Joy, in that one picture of Boulder, said that a lot of people thought that she was Japanese because of the way that she looked. And she could speak fluent Japanese as well as her husband. And her husband could also teach Esperanto. And the Esperanto teaching comes in at the nurse's residence at Sparrow Hospital in Lansing, where a young Margaret Yider who has
My
research
mother-in-law.
completed, has said they're talking as a nurse as well as going to Yale.
Well, how did she come by learning Japanese?
Okay, I'm gonna come.
This is World War II, and they have has gone with Agnes Baldwin Alexander in 1939 at New Holland. So she deepened them not only in Japanese but also in Esperanto. So David was teaching Esperanto in Lansing for the better part of a year. And so David and Joy were both involved with teaching Esperanto, which Baha'i had said at one time it would be a universal auxiliary language, and a lot of
Eventually,
Baha'is
they actually
felt that it would be Esperanto.
What is Esperanto?
Esperanto is the auxiliary language that was this is developed by Emil Zamenhof, and a lot of Baha'is knew of him and his daughter specifically, and there have been a couple of movies that are in Esperanto, and the one I can tell you about that I know the best starred a young William Shatner.
He was speaking Yiddish.
Yes.
Come on, you know it wasn't Esperanto.
Like I said, it says, and there's another one which I don't know specifically about.
But it was a reconstructed international language,
Right.
so that no matter who or where you were, that you could communicate. And still today, they have Esperanto conferences.
Yep.
But it couldn't keep up with technical language.
Not only technical, but it is completely based on Western
Yes,
language.
vocabulary.
It's tried to be neutral to basically Europe, but it
Yes.
didn't incorporate too much of Chinese or Hindu or anything.
Yeah. Right.
This is, I was looking for it used to have it as an icon.
Hindi,
This is, oh, here.
Well, I'm speaking off the top of my head. I apologize.
But
Okay, so it says, so one of the things that I had done was to show Louis Gregory and Joy Earl in Michigan. Specifically, this is highlighting the month between January 16th and February 17th of 1942. Okay, this is how I usually start my presentations. This is the quotation from Baha'i. If you be aware of the truth, if you possess the truth, which others are deprived, share it with them in the language of utmost kindness and goodwill. So this is Louis Gregory this is on the left. This is a picture of him that was taken in Haiti. This is a picture of Joy Hill Earl. On the right, this is a picture that was taken of her by Helen Eggleston at New Holland. So we found Louis Gregory in Idlewild, Michigan on August 21st. And this is the article that Stephen Collins found, because I had posited that it might be there. So I'll read this because it's relatively short. Thursday, August 21st was an occasion of unusual interest and pleasure at Paradise Gardens, marking the annual barbecue provided by Mr. and Mrs. H.O. Wilson. Early in the day, people began to arrive from Idlewild, Reed City, Baldwin, and surrounding towns in such numbers as to tax the capacity of the pavilion. The dietary provisions had to be increased several fold, and a large part of the large crowd remained to enjoy the dancing party, the special music that closed the day's festivities. Just to let you know, as a personal note, Tabina, this is a barbecue issue, and most barbecues don't go well when they run out of food.
Uh-oh.
So, Louis Gregory, let me go back because I actually didn't read that portion after that. At 3 o'clock, Mrs. Turner, in a few well-chosen words, presented the speaker of the day, a Mr. Louis G. Gregory of Somerville, Massachusetts, a traveling lecture on the Baha'i movement. He congratulated Paradise Gardens upon the cosmopolitan nature of the gathering. This is blacks and whites together in 1924. And saying that God Almighty had no prejudices and he wanted his children to have none. He said that God had created man for joy, not for sorrow, for life, not for death. The way of true happiness was friendliness and accord among all the elements, races, and nations in the world. He then presented arguments to show the fallacy and harm that sprung from prejudices among nations, races, and religions, and admonished all to seek the path of peace, conciliation, and true brotherhood. The address was very happily received by the large audience. The Baha'i movement was founded by a Persian nobleman, Baha'u'llah. Its leading principles are independent search for truth, the oneness of humanity, the underlying unity, and basic harmony of all religions, agreement between religion and science, equality between man and woman, the abandonment of all prejudices, a universal auxiliary language, universal education, universal peace, and a universal tribunal, solution to the economic problem, and the power of the Holy Spirit. This was an article that was in the Lake Star Ledger of Baldwin, Michigan, the Lake County, in 1924. Now, there is a Idlewild Cultural and Historical Museum in Idlewild, and one of the books that was written on Idlewild, The Black Eden, had a specific chapter devoted to religious life and services. There's 7 pages in that chapter. Louis Gregory is not mentioned at all. At the end of his August sojourn, he is there speaking at the eulogy of one Alice Williams, whose husband was Dr. Daniel Hale Williams, who, if you know your history, was the first person to perform open heart surgery in America, and also was a person of African descent. He, along with W.E.B. Du Bois, were original investors and property owners in Idlewild. In fact, it was W.E.B. Du Bois inviting Louis Gregory to come to Idlewild. Now, my kingdom, for a picture of W.E.B. Du Bois and Louis Gregory together, because that is one of the things in there, the specific articles that Stephen has found where Louis Gregory and James Weldon Johnson and Elaine Locke and the basic folks, founders of the Harlem Renaissance, were all together in Harlem. And that included one Mary Hanford Ford. And so when we speak about that, the group was organized by Mae Maxwell, who just happens to be the mother of Amado Baha Ruhiya Hanum.
Who is?
The wife of the leader of the Baha'i faith before 1957.
Thank
And
you.
so, Louis Gregory, it says, we'll go to, this is 1942, when we start this. He actually comes to Detroit, outside of Detroit, and speaks at the YWCA in Highland Park. It says, and he talks specifically about the spiritual destiny of America. So this is January 16, 1942. It said, this is right after the U.S. enters World War II. It said, 11 days later, Louis Gregory comes to Flint and speaks about America's spiritual destiny. This is the Flint YWCA. It no longer exists. This is the Highland Park one is there, but it's something they transitioned. In fact, they may have just raised it. It may have just been. So, all of these describe Louis Gregory and America's spiritual destiny. Between, it says, this is Highland Park, and it says, and Flint is New Helen. And we are speculating that it is possible that Louis Gregory had communicated with both Lou and Helen Eggleston about doing this tour. We're not sure as of yet, but there are certain pieces of New Helen archives which we haven't yet found. So this is Louis Gregory coming to Lansing. This is where I grew up. This is where, as I was raised. Do you think I knew about this? No. Did I actually, this is go into the YWCA when I was a young person? Yes. Here's the picture of the Lansing YWCA. Is it there now? No. It was raised in 2002, replaced by a parking garage in a business development. So, I said, when we speak about Baha'i history, it's really important for us to at least address the fact that some of these places in communities, a lot of people who were speaking about the Baha'i message may have gone from local communities.
And let me say that, so I find a lot of these newspapers, and they're all locally based somewhere, but I have no understanding of the local environment, right? So it is absolutely necessary that every city across the country, we have Baha'is who get engaged with this kind of work so that they can connect Because I can't drive to Lansing and then find where the YWCA is. I mean, I could, but I can't go to every city in America. I can't. You have to. You have to. And Burton did it. He went place to place looking for these things.
And thankfully, it was easy to find certain things because they were listed locally in the local history section of the library. And the fun part is, if you look, it says I did a presentation to the Wilmette Institute on the history of the Baha'i faith in Lansing, Michigan from 1912 to 1972, which includes a lot more information.
Which is
than what
live
we're
online.
saying. So, anyway, as you'll notice, this is February, it says her presentation was Sunday, February 8th. 9 days after Louis Gregory is in Lansing, it says Joy Earl, who becomes his mentee, and this is, we'll get to that later. It says evening service 6:30, subject World Brotherhood, Mrs. Joy Earl as the guest speaker. And this is the Michigan Avenue Methodist Church at the corner of Michigan and Edwards in Lansing. And it too is a parking lot. And unfortunately was raised in 1963. Now, here's the part that's really intriguing for me. This one, so let's go back before we go to Buck's Corners. Okay, this is 312 North Holmes. This is a block away from Sparrow Hospital and a block away from the Michigan Methodist Church. This is where David Earl had rented this house in October of 1941. This says that portion of January and February, we are saying that Louis Gregory, Joy Earl, and David Earl got together specifically to develop the following information involving, this is Louis Gregory speaking in northern Michigan. This is 18 years after Idaho. So we just found out about this information too. But this house was just a block away, and with the expansion of Sparrow Hospital, it also is long gone. And this is like had been 20 years. But we found this through the records of the local history section, and David Earl signed to rent this dated October of 1941. And he had it for 5 years. We don't know how many times he and Joy had come back to actually be there, because the Baha'i history shows him and Joy as being in Detroit. But the actual truth is that they were rotating between Detroit and Lansing due to her condition and his job as the statewide personal examiner for civil service there in Michigan.
Is that the house that had the fire?
No, that's a different presentation. Okay, but thank you for mentioning that. So, this is, and I'm going to have Kevin Genus tell you this story.
Louis Gregory to give 3 talks in Buck District. Buck's Corners. Louis Gregory, Negro, will give a series of lectures next week in the interests of promoting the brotherhood of man, it is announced. Mr. Gregory will speak at the home of Clarence Wilder in Buck School District on Monday, February 16th at 2:30 p.m. wartime, and at Buck School that evening at 8:30 o'clock. On February 17th, he will speak at the Everett Dumas home at 8:30 p.m. and will also speak at Bentwater High School on that day. The public is welcome to attend any of these lectures. Mr. Gregory is a former practicing attorney of Washington, D.C., and is a member of the National Baha'i Interracial Committee. He has traveled extensively throughout the United States, Europe, Northern Africa, and the Near East. He is a member of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States and Canada, the administrative body directing all Baha'i activities in the Western Hemisphere.
So,
That was cool.
I'm glad you like that. His voice sounds familiar. He does a lot of commercial voiceovers. One that I remember specifically is how everybody is supposed to be going to the Samsung flip phone as opposed to the Apple iPhone, where he says, the iPhone doesn't flip. I'm like, okay. Anyway, so this is the Wilder farm house, and there's a story behind this, because this isn't actually where it was when he spoke. Where it was in front of this 300-year-old tree, which is about 1,000 yards to the south. it sat on a cement foundation, and the owner of this farm told us that the folks who wanted to purchase a parcel of his land just to the north of it said they wanted to build a house, but they didn't want something big and they didn't want the expense for it. So the farmer told us, well, I'll sell you this place for $1, rather than raising it and you building a brand new structure. This is the locale that Louis Gregory spoke at, but it was here 1,000 yards to the south. So they built their own foundation and an additional piece in order for him, it says, to wind up having his farming parcel, which is to the north of the Wilder farm. So that would happen in the last 25 years. This location is the Bucks Corners Schoolhouse. Now, Bucks Corners, if you look at it on the map, you won't see an actual designation of a little dot that says Bucks Corners. It's actually up in that section about 15 miles from Pentwater. And so it says the house is now a residence. I mean, the school is now a residence. But Louis Gregory spoke there. Nobody's asking me a question about wartime. So what's wartime? Wartime is an hour in advance due to, it says the U.S. wanted to be closer to the times in the European theater.
Really?
Glad I taught you something today.
Why did they do that?
They did it so in terms of wartime, it's like it says 2:30 p.m. wartime is actually 1:30 but with an hour added. So
For Europe.
yeah, so it's for Europe. So it's 2:30 here in the U.S. when it actually would have been 1:30. But so when everybody talks about daylight savings time and how we do things, remember that this is not, this is the U.S.'s first foray in a changing time. So this is Pentwater High School, which in 1942 is where Louis Gregory spoke. Now, it had a graduating class of 12 white people, and he was there in February to promote the interest of, it said, universal brotherhood. This is of man. And what about February do we know? It was the birth of Abraham Lincoln. So, his specific talk dealt with the brotherhood of man, and a lot of it was similar to what Joy Earl had spoken about in Lansing a few weeks earlier. And so the one location that I don't have up here that I wanted to replace is the Everett Dumas residence in Scottville. Now, if those of you that know this is writing, yes, Everett Dumas is a descendant of Alexander Dumas. That would be the Count of Monte Cristo. That would be the Three Musketeers. In fact, his middle name is Alexander. So Everett and Alexander Dumas and his wife, as said, hosted Louis Gregory in Scottville during this particular time.
Dumas's father was a black Haitian and he was one of the commanding generals of Napoleon's army.
Yes.
Oh.
And it says, it says, Coralie Franklin Cook's letter back to Abdul Baha'i, she describes how the African blood runs through the entire portion of humanity, including Alexander Dumas, Pushkin, and Alexander Hamilton. So when you see the movie that it's Hamilton, understand that he is a person of African descent.
And that's where the Vaness family comes in, because they were the one that handed to the Hamilton duel the pistol.
I thought you were going to keep that quiet. I can understand.
It says we're all related. It's what we are.
It says that we are. And
We're
just,
all
you know,
related
so
in this room. That's it.
Yeah, so,
Alexander Hamilton doesn't even look like he's got point black.
but he is.
Oh,
And
geez.
so this is that picture again that I showed you of Joy Earl, David Earl, Marcia Gale, and Louis Gregory. Now Stephen and I have theorized that obviously this guy here had something to do. And this woman here, we believe, is Genevieve Coy,
Oh,
Oh,
the first Baha'i of Ohio and the administrator in Green Acre in the same year, the summer of 1934, where her father, Ali Cooley Khan, Louis Gregory, she's the administrator, Mildred Modahed for Sabina,
Yes.
Joy Earl, who also winds up doing it, because she was a concert pianist. Remember, she went to Oberlin, and she was at the conservatory where David met her. Remember, this is the gentleman who basically was kicked out of Oberlin for marrying her. And so, it says, with regard, it says to that, the reason I wanted to connect all of these people together is to show the interrelationship of Louis Gregory with Seattle. It says to show the interrelationship of Joy Earl with Louis Gregory, because one of the Baha'is who actually is still living, he's 90 years young, Bernie Streets, theorized that, he said, Joy Earl, and he told me this, Joy Earl is the daughter that Louis and Louisa Gregory never had. And Joy Earl received Louis Gregory's prayer book when he passed. And Joy Earl, when she passed, gave her, this is the same book to David Earl, who then went pioneering for the faith in Palau and Guam. When he came back, he gave that prayer book to Archives. And Archives has it amongst David Earl's effects, not amongst Louis Gregory's, but of David Earl's, because when David Earl received it, he stamped his name in the first page of the lower right corner. And everyone said, well, why did he do that? I said, at that particular point, he was making this issue about having the prayer book. And the top, you see in Louis Gregory's own handwriting, prayer revealed by Baha'u'llah. And that's the prayer on page 61, and that's the prayer that, as we had talked about. And it's also the prayer that Martha Root is recorded in saying, so that everyone gets the idea of the interrelatedness of Martha Root. And the question was, did Martha Root meet Al-Baha'i? Yes, at the Race Unity Banquet in June in Teaneck. She's one of those faces that's there. Al-Baha'is on the left, Martha Root's in the back. Al-Baha'i, I said, had wound up stating specifically how important it was to have this gathering. Now, did Martha Root and Louis Gregory ever meet? Were they ever together in a photograph? Yes, 1931, at the same Roy Wilhelm residence. It says, and this year was the 100th anniversary of the first National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States and Canada. And the picture of that assembly, or 7 members of that assembly, was taken by Roy Wilhelm, and it included Louis Gregory. So when we start talking about all of these places that these people have been, and all of these places that this is we're looking for, we're saying that each individual Baha'i community has a history. And Shoghi Effendi talked specifically about knowing that history. He talked about it specifically to the Baha'is in Iran, and he talked about it specifically as being history being one of those things that it says Baha'is are supposed to study and know, along with economics, along with science, along with else. And so what we are, the Baha'i historians are saying, in effect, it's that important. It's your own individual history to understand that. So with that, I conclude. Thank you. This is everything.
I was trying to get this out with the Lord.
It was a great neighborhood.
Depressed TV.
4 or 5 blocks. 26. Yeah.
Pointed at the light.
Jewish resident.
And that was the neighborhood.
That's in honesty, absolutely.
As for Pearl Harbor, Japanese people, were interned.
Revenue, when you say revenue, that includes the mechanics, the everything, the sealers and all of that. Not only just women, but one thing you have to remember, how to get dressed. You don't come out there with no belt pushes.
And then later, Mrs. King decided to come to Seattle.
and she was 17 when she came. She came on her own. In fact, she lost her family. Her family actually died.
But William Gross is the guy who started the barber shop and the restaurant, and so basically the Central District was created out of Gross's business and his family.
Like this is a picture of him with his Rainier View T-shirt and the rest of his classmates with him. He's one with the R, and his hue is the same as the white students.
And somebody said, well, yeah, we don't want no white people on this. He said, well, I thought you wanted the dress people. He said, if you don't want the dress people, then you don't want me.
His wife's sister came to visit. She also brought one of her nephews with her, and I sort of got a crush on him. So I did see them in that light, but don't never really seemed on Hamilton at all.
Felt comfortable going everywhere.
Look at the map. There's Al Smith Jr.
that he went to. The Black and Tan Club was a big one. And then the Rizal Club.
Oh, that was the beginning of a very rich history of coalitions, interracial coalitions here in Seattle.
We always learned 1852 roughly is when the Denny Party and others came, and then Seattle was set down. The Washington Territory, Oregon Territory did not have slavery, but there was still a desire to get cheap labor. So a lot of the kind of jobs that African Americans had under slavery, and the areas that were non-slave states, basically Asian Americans, Chinese, Japanese, Filipinos, ended up doing the jobs that African Americans had. For African Americans coming into Seattle, Central District was a very free place compared to Chicago, compared to New York. So usually the migration is South Carolina, the biggest slave state. Oftentimes they went over to New York City, and then they go to Chicago. In Chicago, they went ahead and went to the West Coast. When they went to the West Coast, there were a number of African Americans already here. There was the first guys, George Washington, Lopez, I think, and then there was another person, William Gross, eventually. But William Gross is the guy who started the barber shop and the restaurant, and so basically the Central District was created out of Gross's business and his family, where his family settled. So the wealthier African Americans lived in East Madison, the poorer ones lived on Yesler. And so Yesler became the convergent point between where the Asians were at and where the African Americans were at. It wasn't just Yesler, it was also Jackson Street, which is why we have the Jackson Street Brigade. And Atlantic Street was where eventually, as Chinese were excluded, Japanese Americans came. And Japanese American Japantown back then went all the way to Dearborn, where the area of Goodwill is now. So a lot of the neighborhoods end up collapsing together. In fact, as time goes on, because after Japanese Americans were incarcerated, African Americans moved into many of their homes, which is why Central District goes all the way down to Massachusetts now. Okay, which wasn't the way it was before. But again, the thing that was going on back then is everybody was converging, and because it smelled around Yesler, all people of color had to live east of Occidental Street. So it merged over time to Occidental Street, which means Westerner. All of us Orientals, meaning Easterner, had to live east of Occidental. So everybody, it didn't start out well. A lot of us didn't like each other. Chinese didn't like Japanese. Japanese did not like African Americans. But the main thing is, over time, familiarity and such, you kind of see through what people have what have been said about each other. And so over time, all of us came together. And this is why a lot of us say it's become Central District South Seattle.
President Roosevelt, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and his wife saw that as black people, we weren't getting any work or didn't have anything to do. So they set up what was called the NYA that took the girls in so that we could, and promised us a job. They told us if we came to Boeing, we could get a job.
They
so
became
we went to
Rosie the
Boeing
River Nurse.
in Wichita. When we got there, they didn't have any work there for us, so then they said, well, you can go to Washington. So naturally, we didn't know what Washington was or where it was. So we went back, we told our caretaker. She said, oh, so you guys gonna see the president? Go see the president. So we said, okay. So we went back the next day, and he pulled a map from over the table and said, now here's what I want you to know what's going. So this is Kansas. But instead of you guys going all the way over here to Seattle, Washington. So we had the one girl said, "Oh, that's the end of the world. That's the end of the world. We can't go there." And he said, "No, it's not that bad." I said, "But you talk it over just so your long that's keeping you." And if she agrees, well, you know, you can go. So we got there. Well, I was the only one who went over there with them. So they said, "Well, you got to do something." So I don't know what I'm going to do. I said, "You didn't tell me what to do." He said, "Well," I said, "I know what." I said, "You guys got piles of shavings everywhere I look. There's a pile here and a pile there." And I said, "I'll get a broom and a waste bucket and the deal to put it in." So then one guy got smart. Said, "Oh, she piles it here, she piles it there." Said, "We supposed to be the pilots." So they named me the pilot girl. So anyway, but that worked. And pretty soon they had an opening back in the shop, in Bowen's shop.
And I was born in 1923, January, here in the Seattle area. 17th and Madison. And I moved to 22nd and Cherry. I went to school at Horace Manor for a while. I went to Rainier. From Rainier over to Garfield. And from Garfield, I worked at Dawn's and went to war. And decided I didn't want to build airplanes, I wanted to be in them. So I took care of that. It was easy to enlist. I didn't have any problems there at all. It was kind of routine, really, because all of us in the neighborhood, a dozen kids my age, most of them enlisted in the Navy. I enlisted in the Air Force, Air Corps. And I didn't get called
Can I
right
stop
away. I hung around and playing basketball with.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna pause it because it's about a half an hour long, and because people have to get out, I'm going to send this to everybody, and I'm gonna send it to Sabina, and then Sabina can send it now. The only reason I wanted you all to see this is because the way we got the guy, when we hired this guy out of Tacoma, you see how doing the research, there's a lot of video footage with the Seattle Public Library, University of Washington, and all he did was clip it because when we interviewed the people, I'm not going to show you all the
in context,
because when he edited, he cut our talking to the people out.
Interesting.
And so
but there's an art to getting people to talk too. That's an important thing. And for the people who might be doing the research, that might be valuable for them to see. How do you get people to talk about these things?
Well, we had like some questions that we just asked them to speak about where they grew up in the Central District. What was, back in the day, what was it like?
But you did that in a conversation or on a piece of paper?
Well, I had like notes, and everybody had their own individual notes. Because like when I spoke to Al Smith, with the guy that was standing with the map, those are the maps that's in Mohai right now because I took all of their addresses and worked with the Department of City Planning here, and they created those huge maps of all of the jazz clubs, his whole trail, and you're going to see that at State University. It's my artwork. It's a collage that I was telling you all about. It's in a gold frame right now. Right now, it's being considered for the National African American Museum in Washington, D.C., or the new home will be at a historical black college. And I'm even thinking about a museum in Europe when I was in Spain because of the soldiers and the presence of African Americans. So it's a work in progress. But I took this concept because of the human rights and all of these old magazines. I proposed to Sabina, let's have the young people do something, the history of human rights through the eyes of some of those magazines we have. And that's how come when we got those new, look-alike, those from the public library, we got all of this rich stuff here, put the young people on a project and give it to the United Nations. That's just another thought of the vision. Hey, I was wondering where you were hiding. I was at church. Mercy. Yes, I forgot today is Sunday.
What magazines, youth magazines did you talk
They're
about?
in the Crawford. There's a bunch
We
of
have them right here. Life magazines.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So that's my presentation, everybody. And I'm gonna sit down now so he can get back into that genealogy stuff because I found that interesting too. And this is a work in progress. I just wanted to bring this. It was sporadically done. I just put it together. I told Sabine on the phone I was just bringing this stuff, and I wasn't going to take up a lot of time.
But you gave us a real good overview.
Okay.
And somewhere that creates a really visual, impactful medium of expressing those stories.
Yes.
You did a great job.
So I'm going to get out of this, and you all will get access to this.
This
when I
guy
send
was
it.
born in 1923, so he must be 100 years old this year.
Yeah, he's a lot.
Okay, guys, don't walk in front of the camera, please.
When you get into, if you're going to do this documentary about the Baha'is in the Northwest or something like that, probably the name that's going to most recognize if you have got the history of the region in your mind, Beatrice Kennedy.
Oh, that's it. You and I need to talk about Beatrice Kennedy.
From
Portland.
Oregon was a major leader in the whole Northwest, but especially in Oregon. She was a Baha'i from 1914. We have a gentleman that just walked in.
Yeah.
Bahaipedia.org. It's the same software as Wikipedia, but it's an independent system. There's no official relationship.
But everything Baha'i is in there.
Yes.
And all the people and everything that are just coming around from the Baha'i community, so we can go have a shortcut to that.
So can you add to it the history that you learned, like you can add to Wikipedia?
So Wikipedia, so the rules of notability with Wikipedia require a certain number of sources, and they don't clear. Right, there's got to be enough good sources, verifiable sources, for an article in Wikipedia. There's some other issues there that I'm not going to go into. Bahaipedia, the main difference between Bahaipedia and Wikipedia, from my point of view, is that Baha'i published sources are not assumed to be biased in Bahaipedia, whereas in Wikipedia, it's assumed to be biased and therefore lower priority, and you have trouble justifying using these kind of sources. So non-Baha'i published sources are much better in Wikipedia than Baha'i sources. But in Bahaipedia, we're putting them on equal footing. So that's the only technical change.
Yes.
But within that context, what we can do, so there's a Louis Gregory article in Wikipedia, but we have become aware that the primary biography, for example, has a brief mention of a visit of Louis Gregory to northern Michigan, and we found newspaper articles that detail significant events that happened with him. And it's just a couple of phrases to move the world. So we want to do more. And one of the places we're doing it, he does it on Facebook, creating posts and talking about things and posting them and getting people to see them. But in this article, what we're doing is more that academic sort of summary statements, citations, and all that kind of stuff. But this is in process. And as we find other clippings in other newspapers, I find them and try to stick them into this. And here I've turned a lot of things into readable text of some kind. Not even saying it's spelled right. This is a sandbox. But as you go down, it starts degenerating into more of a list of things. And then at some point, it's just like groups of things. And I've got a break in the site. I've got to fix that citation. It's a break in my syntax. And then eventually, it's literally just somewhere down here. Some of them aren't even full lines. It's just a citation of something.
And that's just like one person.
But I've got to fix all this. And right now, we're at 933 citations of places he's been, some of which are into Move the World, but many of which are not. So Seattle, Lansing, Michigan, North Carolina, Texas,
Idlewild.
Idlewild. There's all these places where Louis Gregory physically was present, and he's the most prominent African-American Baha'i inside the faith. There are others that we've got to do, but I got 900 places here, citations to try to make sense of, and To Move the World went great. It was published in the early 80s, so it was a huge amount of work. But we can do better now. And people, when I put out a message saying Louis Gregory was in Raleigh, North Carolina in 1928 or 1943 or whatever it was, at Shaw University in this chapel, I don't remember the name of the chapel. People took notice, and I got replies back saying, hey, I didn't know this. That was it. And we needed to find this chapel, so we started a little back and forth saying, which chapel? Because actually there's a new chapel and an old chapel. Oh, it had to be the old chapel because the new chapel was built in the 1950s. Okay, well, let's figure that out. Where's the old chapel? And people go there to pray. So once you've gathered the sources, and you should start thinking about your audience, who you're going to reach to as you transform the sources into something to talk about. For example, I ran across references to a very early African American Baha'i. The first Baha'i in North Carolina was African American. Her name was Felice Sajwar. She lived into her 90s, into the 1980s, and she was audio interviewed, and the recording was saved, and I got a copy of it.
Oh, that's great.
Somewhat degraded and copy of copy kind of thing going on. But I was able to make out with AI noise cleanup that there was a reference to a prayer that she memorized from 1919. When Louis Gregory was there, she memorized a prayer. And she had lost some of it, but she remembered several phrases. And I was able to find those phrases in an actual published prayer. So this is the first prayer memorized in North Carolina.
How do I create this sandbox now?
So literally, you register with Baha'i.
I just did.
Okay, so then you will have the opportunity of having this thing in the corner, and you click on it. Yours will be red, and all you got to do is create something, and then save that page.
Yeah,
and
then I was planning to do one for Tagore. I think.
Okay, so this is just your talk page. This is for general public. You click the /, type sandbox, and you don't have to have anything else. And click that, and that will come up, in your case, to an empty page. You just put anything in there and hit save, and it's your first sandbox.
Right. And then you can also put stuff, somebody else can put stuff in there.
The politics of internal policies of how wikis work is, if it's a sandbox, it's yours.
Okay.
I have
you can invite people to help.
Okay.
But we can look at it because it's not private, but it's not advertised, and it's up to you politically within the way wikis moderate themselves. You can invite people to, but we should not edit your page.
Okay.
I have had some sandboxes where other people edited my page unasked, but they were constructive edits, and I thought that was a friendly gesture.
There we go. So, Stephen, you're going to tell us a little bit about genealogy.com
Right. So
because
Seattle specifically is a very gapped coverage in newspapers.com. That is to say, there's very few editions of newspapers across very few years of coverage. So it turns out Genealogy Bank actually has a lot of Seattle coverage of newspapers. So I was just putting in Seattle.
this is a big deal for us for in Seattle.
Waiting for the website to update. The internet is getting in trouble.
Maybe you can punch in Ida Finch.
Sure. When it finally responds to me.
Oh, let me see what you're doing. Okay.
So I put Washington in this, Washington State, and then I put Seattle, and it finally let me click, so it shows up. So I'm going to click away. And you can be more specific in other ways, but now I'm just going to put Ida Finch. But remember, she had a married name too, so again, you have
That is
to
her
worry
married
about,
name.
But no, I mean, Mrs. her husband.
Oh, yeah, John. Oh, no, that was,
But
I'm
it turns
sorry.
out Ida Finch is one that shows up.
Yeah.
All the way up to 1972, someone's talking about her.
Yeah,
But
that's when she died, and yeah.
Oldest publication. And we go back, if I remember, we might get in the 1900s. Yeah. So in Genealogy Bank, if it's grayed out for me, I've seen it. I've gone to it. Doesn't mean I clipped it, but I've actually.
Yeah, like when you
clicked on
hyperlink, you were
and
in
seen
it, it changes color, right?
So this is none I have not gone to. So it could be because I think it's not her. or something.
23, I wonder if that's because of Martha Root.
I don't know, but let's find out.
Or she might be in Japan, and that's where it's.
This one will show a little highlight, so it acts a little different. It's going to fill
Yeah.
it out.
2 minutes after 2.
Oh, this is the kind of survivor, probably the Japan thing. Yep.
Yeah, the earthquake.
And among the survivors is a list of stars that included 3 people, including
Yeah.
Fish.
See, this is good. So it's a story about her survival in Japan.
And this is completely clickable from my point of view. So I'm going to go ahead and actually click it. So here's a scissors. You got the sort of box thing going. Come down here.
The Baha'i mother of Seattle.
Oh, okay.
She's the
Saved
one
in the
that started
folder.
it in 1907.
You could download it and other things.
Save it, okay, and then where you saving it onto your what?
It's part of the online collection of clippings. If you just save
Okay.
it this way. And there's a little checkbox for public,
Oh yeah,
which I leave on for everything.
yeah,
So now it's saved, and it's got this sort of box in my view.
yeah.
So now I go to anything out there, saved items, which is my box, but I could look at it through my URL, but I'm going to change. As soon as it gets there, I'm going to do clippings instead of my view, my personal view. And clippings is anybody who's clipped on genealogybank.com at all. There's not one. And I just did mine, so mine is the most recent one, because this took 22 seconds ago. So I click on it, and it finally gets there. This is the public URL, but it's long and messy, just so you know. But that URL is available to anybody to see. And if you want to do the, like we were talking about, where you save the metadata, and I'm going to get the title here, Seattle Minister Safe in Japanese Quake Zone, comma, space, paste in the metadata from there, get my entire set of information, copy it out, and paste it into your document or your email, whatever you're tracking. And that's aligned in your chronology. Now you could add a little annotation that sort of describes what's going on in that article, and then again, that's just part of your long list of materials, hopefully, that you'll build up, and you emphasize more and more the words that describe the source, and you minimize the source until it's a footnote. You don't lose anything, but you minimize it until it's not obstructing the story that you're creating.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got a story. Now you got to transform it into something for your audience, whether that's a lecture, a song,
See what else you have on
a
her.
drama,
Yeah,
a documentary, whatever it is that you're going to do is a structure that presents the story, but the information that's in the story comes from actual sources.
yeah.
And there's a huge tidal wave of material that's available now that wasn't available 30 years ago.
So what you do is you go to the Wikipedia or the Bahaipedia, and if you want to look for more, then you go to what he's talking about, which is a footnote, and you click on the link.
And it would take you to one of these articles.
Okay, that's cool.
So that's, as long as in here we're making sure that we're faithful in an academic sense, that we're keeping to our sources about
Right, rather than getting into
making stuff up and wishing
right,
something's true
right,
and stuff
right.
we're basing on
I
what
know this is
actually
the
happened.
actual source of it.
Right. So then, but this is the basis of what can become a story that's
Right.
easier to tell in some other way. So, like I say, I found that this particular prayer was memorized by the first Baha'i of North Carolina. So I can now turn that into a story and say, this is the prayer that was first memorized in North Carolina. Here's the prayer. And then find someone who can put it to song. I'm not a musician. I need someone who can do music. Take the wordings and the phrasing of the song, of the prayer, and make it into song. And a lot of Baha'is do this kind of thing. There's musicians that put prayers to music. So there's an art to it. That's not my art. I don't have that. I can do this stuff, but someone else has got to do that stuff. So I want a friend who's going to take this stuff and take it into a new direction.
And as historians, we want to go to the not secondary sources. We want to go to primary sources.
Well, it's a wave of something that has to be done. At some point, we're going to create all these Wikipedia and Bahaipedia articles.
Yeah.
And then someone else can take a whole bunch of Bahaipedia articles. For example, a Bahaipedia article could be the coverage of the Baha'i faith in Seattle.
Right.
All right, so there's your article. Another one could be the Baha'i periodicals coverage of the faith in Seattle. So now
Yeah.
you got 2 articles. Or Ida Finch, something like that, whatever your focus is. You're going to have a suite of articles.
Yeah.
And now you can begin to look at possibly telling the complete story of the whole Baha'i faith in Seattle.
Yeah.
Bring all these articles together and make one big story out of it.